Welcome, friends, to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And I'm writer Luke Elliott.
So this week we are doing a From the Vault episode as we're taking the week off. We are releasing a previously unreleased to the main feed episode. It's a bonus episode covering The Exorcist 2.
That's right. We figure it's approaching Halloween, so why not a scary bad movie? Scarily bad movie?
Yeah. I mean, back-to-back bad movies. Like, we got to introduce some quality to the feed here soon, huh?
I think I call this a disastrous movie as well, which is funny. Now we're going to have back-to-back disasters on the feed. Fantasy isn't the only one that can have some really bad movies made. We also got an awful horror movie here.
Yeah.
Which some sci-fi elements too got introduced into The Exorcist.
And Mike Arnzen, previous guest, I think he's come on multiple times, was one of our earliest guests. He came on for The Thing, and he recommended at one point that we watch this. And I remember him being like, you must do it. And then we went and did it, and we were like, why, Mike? I think there are probably some things that we're missing for like the hardcore Exorcist fans. But yeah, I remember not really enjoying this.
I think we're perhaps extrapolating a little bit from what he actually said. I believe he said just that before you watch Exorcist 3, you need to watch Exorcist 2. I think just to get the context. And then I believe he said there was like one scary scene in it or something, which we talk about in this bonus episode. So anyway, definitely check that out. It's a fun episode where we're just kind of exploring one of the worst movies ever made. I think this ranks among them from like official lists I've seen out there. I also just wanted to say I have a short story that is now available in podcast form on the Reckoning podcast. I'll put a link in the show notes. And it is a sci-fi story that I've talked about that is in the magazine, but now if you're a podcast listener, you can listen to me read it. And I thought it turned out pretty good. So check that out if you're curious. Oh, we also wanted to talk about what we are going to be doing as our next official project on the feed, and that is going to be the Cabinet of Curiosities, which is going to be on Netflix, and it's coming out towards the end of the month. And our sort of Halloween special we're doing is just covering the 5 short stories that lent themselves to the 5 episodes that are adaptations. So we're going to cover 5 short stories in a single episode. It'll be interesting to see how it goes. 2 of them are H.P. Lovecraft stories. Should be a spooky sort of Halloween themed episode. Should be fun, I think.
Yeah, it's a Guillermo del Toro project, so that was a huge reason why we wanted to tackle it. We both love Guillermo del Toro, and he's just a visionary horror icon at this point. So for him to come out with something right around Halloween, like in the fact that it is based on adaptations, we were like, how can we pass that up?
Yeah, should be fun. We will also cover the other 3 episodes that are not adaptations on our Patreon probably next month, so look for that. All right, well, I hope everyone's having a good October. And we will talk to you closer to Halloween. And now enjoy this previous Patreon exclusive.
Today we're talking about a movie.
Yeah.
It is technically a movie. It's called The Exorcist 2: The Heretic. Mm-hmm. And we covered The Exorcist with Mike Arnzen probably about a year ago, and that was a lot of fun. Fantastic horror film.
I think in that episode we asked if we could skip to Exorcist 3, and he said no, we had to watch Exorcist 2. So I'm holding him partially responsible for this.
Yeah. I mean, I can't, like he was right. Like, this is better than the original in every way. The tension that it builds, the nuance and the subtlety to it.
Yeah, that's not what he said.
I'm just
got to clear his name a little bit. Yeah, I mean this movie. I had a Twitter thread where I tried to sort of live tweet while I was watching it because I read some stuff beforehand. I was just like, oh, what am I getting into? Gene Siskel of like Siskel and Ebert fame.
Yep.
The worst motion picture I've seen in almost 8 years on the job. So early on in his career. We have critics who say it's all too ludicrous to frighten, and the only time you're likely to hide your head will be in shame for watching it. And I was shamed. This felt like the kind of movie that, especially today, that the only reason to be watching this movie is because you have a podcast or something like that, or you have a passion for watching some of the worst movies ever made.
Yeah, I mean, this is I want to frame this for myself a little bit. I think it's good these kinds of movies exist, and I think they are a product of their time, because without movies like this, I don't think you get the highs that you get in some other movies. And like the production, they put money into this movie. This was like the most expensive movie that Warner Brothers put out at the time. This is showing the folly of studios sometimes, right? And you need a movie like this to sort of shake things up and be like, oh fuck, like we can't just put it through the machine, spit it back out, and make money.
Hey, that other thing was successful. Let's make a sequel. It doesn't matter if it's good.
Right.
Which clearly no one cared about this being good.
We don't need to understand why the original was successful or why it was, interesting or why people responded so well to it. Let's just make something that's scary and has exorcism elements in it.
Right. Like it almost shows a complete lack of respect for horror as a genre. It's a bunch of people who didn't understand what made the first movie good and was just like, yeah, it'll just be another Exorcist movie, fine.
Yeah. So I appreciate the movie for existing on that plane, and honestly, like there are some people within the production of the movie that were sort of duped into it, which I found out about, like Linda Blair being one of them specifically.
Really?
Yeah, a lot of the cast was completely against a sequel to The Exorcist for a very long time. William Peter Blatty and was obviously against it. William Friedkin was against it. Linda Blair, a lot of people held out for a really long time, and then there was a script that came along that Linda Blair felt like had some substance to it, and Max von Sydow, like there's other people in this movie that were involved in the original.
Yeah.
And but apparently it was so rewritten along the way, and things were changed, and things were just like on the day. It was just a chaotic set and a chaotic shoot in general. And I think I feel bad for Linda Blair, because this is like, she was known as the Exorcist girl. She was known as the possessed kid. And now this was her chance to sort of show as she grew up a little bit. And it was sort of, it was interesting for me to see her growing up on screen. Not that I felt like she had a great performance here, and I think a lot of it had to do with what she was given to do, but like, this could have been her stepping out moment where she was like, that was myself as a child, and this is me like taking on serious acting. And I feel bad for her a little bit, because she said like this, it doesn't even resemble what I was jumping on board for. And at that point, you're contractually obligated. You've already signed on, and you're just like, well,
yeah,
got to do it.
Oh man. I feel bad for her. I mean, this movie made me angry. And one of the things that I think was obvious to me was they were trying to sexualize Regan.
Yeah.
Or Reagan. Still don't know how to say that name.
I love it. That's a through line from our Exorcist.
I can't stop. I can't. It's Reagan, but I can't stop saying Regan for some reason. Anyway, because it's like she's here to distance herself from this childhood performance and show what her chops are now as an adult. I assume young adult. I don't know what her.
I think she's like 17, I believe.
She was 17 in this movie?
I think so.
That's even worse then, because they were like blatantly sexualizing her and trying to say like, look how hot the Exorcist girl is now. I mean, throughout it was like they, clearly they were trying to go the other route, which works directly counter to what I'm sure Linda Blair was hoping to get out of the role.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
That's just one of many ways this movie screws up. You know what? I'd actually be curious to hear, like a brief plot synopsis, because I still don't really know what this movie was trying to be about and trying to have in its plot. And I feel like if someone were to like break it down and try and suss it out, maybe it'll make more sense to me, because I was just left fucking confused by the end of this thing.
Well, interview with John Boorman from 2005. Here we go. Ready? He remarked, "It all comes down to audience expectations. The film that I made, I saw as a kind of riposte to the ugliness and darkness of The Exorcist in 1973. I wanted a film about journeys that was positive and about good, essentially. And I think that audiences in hindsight were right. I denied them what they wanted, and they were pissed off about it, quite rightly. I knew I wasn't giving them what they wanted, and it was really a foolish choice. The film itself, I think, is an interesting one. There's some good work in it, but when they came to me with it, I told John Cawley, who was running Warner Brothers then, that I didn't want it. Look, I said, I have daughters. I don't want to make a film about torturing a child, which is how I saw the original film. But then I read a 3-page treatment for a sequel written by a man named William Goodhart, and I was really intrigued by it because it was about goodness. I saw it then as a chance to film a riposte to the first picture. but it had one of the most disastrous openings ever. There were riots, and we recut the actual print in theaters, but it didn't help, of course, and I couldn't bear to talk about it or look at it for years. So I guess that's not really a synopsis as much as he was trying to make the opposite, the antithesis to The Exorcist.
Well, he made it in at least one way, in as far as quality. If The Exorcist is a well-made, regardless of if you like The Exorcist, I think it's kind of inarguably a well-made movie. And this is,
it's shocking for the time too. And that was the big thing, right? It was so shocking. It was so offensive to some people, and like specifically being tied to the church. Those people are going to respond very, extremely when something like this is brought up and their religion is brought into a movie. So I honestly feel like John Boorman, and I don't know that much. I know he was a Catholic, but I don't know if he was sort of saying like, let's make an Exorcist movie that like shows Catholicism in a better light a little bit or something, or I don't know.
I guess, but like the movie doesn't do any of that. Not really.
Right.
Like, I guess I can see it kind of trying to do that, but like it all gets so lost in this just disastrous pile of garbage that makes no sense. It has multiple different, I don't know, like plot lines that it's trying to execute simultaneously, and it seems to be of the opinion that as long as you just cut things together, that it's fine. You know what I mean? But like it ignores like the language of movies, so it leaves you completely disoriented. Which it almost seems like a small thing to criticize when there's so much else going on wrong here. But there is this bizarre disorientation that I kept getting, where I didn't know when things were happening, and it seemed the movie seemed to be saying these things are happening at the same time, but it didn't make any logical sense for them to be.
Yeah. I mean, that sort of stuff I feel like starts to be the first thing that gets thrown out the window when things aren't working right. They're like, let's just make it like somewhat make sense, and honestly, like that, they talk about it in every script writing class. They talk about it constantly. It's much better to have a simple story that people can follow along with and have it be sort of not quite as compelling as you would hope it to be. You would rather have that than have something that's pure chaos that people can't follow, that's all convoluted, but there's a good story in it. I think the simple thing for people to follow along with, because like you said, you disengage from it. You're not gonna want to stick around to see the great ending that you've written or something great that's there if it's too convoluted and you lose the thread of what's going on. Because it really did feel like they were just like, they got on set each day and they were like, let's just do this, and then like when they got to the edit, they're like, wow, this stuff doesn't really cut together very well because we didn't follow our plan or whatever it was. It just feels like, it feels like there was something wrong with the planning of it, or I don't know, things were changed along the way.
It's a weird, like, there's two movies kind of going on at the same time, and one's bad and one's awful. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like one really works, but it seems like they had this idea for this movie where Reagan is being is like a patient for this like experimental treatment where they're going to be able to like go into her dreams and sort of relive the original traumas and try to figure out what happened, because the psychiatrist thinks that it was medical, and the priest is going to think that it's a possession, and we're going to have some sort of combat of the wills of like, was it science or was it, and like all that seems to be what they were going for. And at the start of the movie I was like, okay, this is what this movie is, this is the plan. We're going to have Pazuzu come into this new sort of almost sci-fi premise and get in there and fuck shit up, and I was like, well, it's probably going to be really stupid, but it's going to be like a fun stupid because it's 80s horror, actually 77 horror, and I was like, it's probably going to have some fun. But somehow in the midst of all of that, we get this entire thing in Africa where someone got obsessed with the idea of like making a locust movie, is the only thing I could just figure out. Yeah. They were like, locusts are creepy, so let's make a bunch of like POV locust camera. I guess they read about how Pazuzu is like this demon of the wind and sky and stuff, right. So they're like, oh, that's locusts. And then they were like, yeah, how creepy would it be to just like see all these locusts all the time, because there were so many shots and scenes of just like looking at locusts. And it was like they were really, I don't know. I wasn't like affected by it. Like I didn't care. Like looking at a pile of locusts isn't scary to me. Maybe that varies from person to person, but I guess it's probably because it's not something I have to deal with that much here. But I don't know, man. And then that just was the tip of the iceberg for the stuff in Africa that just went so wild. So many logic problems. People like that whole like chasm thing that people were climbing up and down. I don't know what the fuck was going on with that. It seemed to be that was the only way to get to that like town they went to, if I want to call it that, or village or whatever it was, which made no sense. And then, oh my god, just the locust suit. We got to talk about the locust suit.
Yeah. James Earl Jones, Oscar nominated James Earl Jones was in a locust suit.
Oh my god, it was so what a weird sequence too. I assume because I think Mike Arnzen in our episode was saying something about there being like a really terrifying sequence or scene in this movie. I don't know what he's talking about. I have a guess as to what that would be, and I think it was probably the nails, the bed of nails walking scene, is my guess. Because it is viscerally upsetting to see that guy try and take a step and have the nails just like punctures through his foot, and then he falls face first towards a bed of nails that are like super spaced out, really gross looking and jagged and incredibly sharp. And you think he's about to have this horrific injury, and then he like wakes up in a hospital where it's all a dream or something. I don't know, because this movie is fucking weird. But that moment is certainly a like lurch moment of like, oh, this is gonna be bad. So maybe that's what he was. Or is there another scene that?
I mean, it can't be the end, right? The end was just like, it couldn't have been the end.
Can't be the end. Can't be the
end.
End.
That's the only other part of like what I would consider to be horror that happened. Like the rest of it was sort of locusts. Like if you don't like bugs or something, you'd probably be affected by that. But
yeah.
The Africa stuff was wild because we did talk about in the first Exorcist
incredibly racist too. We just, I mean, offensively bad.
Well, the original Exorcist has these scenes that take place in the Middle East somewhere, right? And it's sort of like saying that like Pazuzu is like in some way attached to the old, what would be considered the old world, like the where all the things with the Bible took place. Like a lot of that stuff happened there, and tying it there. And then I feel like there's this sort of similar thing going on where we've seen it in multiple stories where like African culture is seen as like mystic or
exotic,
close to the supernatural, and I think that was the step that they made. They were like, well, there was a little bit of this with the Middle East, so let's just do that with sort of like African culture, and then they went real far down there, though.
Completely fictionalized version of Africa too. Like this isn't a real place, and it was clearly like bizarre sets. I don't even think the geography lines up with anywhere that I know of in Africa, at least. But yeah, I'm no expert. But I mean, it looked awful. Every time they were in Africa, it looked awful. And again, it just made no sense. All of a sudden, what's his name? Borman? No, sorry, Burton. Borman's the filmmaker. Richard Burton, who plays Father Lamont. Who, by the way, I just thought was as boring can get to watch on screen.
Read that
unreal.
Linda Blair said that in there were some scenes where he was just reading off cue cards.
I believe it, man. It looked like it was the flattest performance. He didn't give a shit. And yeah, there was a part where he goes to Africa for no discernible reason, and only about half. It's a long sequence. Only towards the end of the sequence do we get any idea of why he's even there. Which is still, I guess, a bit lost on me. Just to like do battle with Pazuzu or learn more about Pazuzu. I don't know. He's retracing Max von Sydow's steps in some way that he saw in a dream. Again, I can't make sense of this movie. James. Help me out.
So interesting. It's so interesting because a lot of it feels like they're like, let's do a new thing. Let's explore Linda Blair's character, Reagan. Let's explore Reagan, and then let's also at the same time explore Pazuzu, because Pazuzu was the demon and everybody became fascinated with Pazuzu. And I'm sure people were talking about Pazuzu and like, oh my god, have you read into him? He's this wind demon. So they took those two things and then they were like, but we don't actually want to do anything different. We just want to go, and like I actually wrote down this thing I think is kind of clever. This movie visually shows us what it's doing to the original, right? They take a car and it's a car crash straight into the steps of the original Exorcist, right at the house, and then the house falls apart.
They destroy the house. They destroy
the
everything.
original by just like completely missing the point. But anyway,
maybe that's what he was trying to do. Like, it seems like he was not a fan of the original movie, which that's your first mistake. Don't bring someone in and make a sequel to a movie they didn't like.
Yeah, so apparently they offered the original to Borman, but he turned it down because he felt like it was too graphic and everything. And then eventually this movie was offered to Stanley Kubrick. And
what, Exorcist 2 was?
Exorcist 2 was, yeah. And he turned it down. He turned it down. And then when John Borman accepted it, Kubrick warned him that the only way a sequel to The Exorcist would succeed is if it was more graphic and horrific than the original. Because I'm assuming Borman was like saying, like, I want it to. The studio was seeking to try to make it a PG film.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so they were really pushing to like kind of have it be like scary to them without it being any sort of gore or like, you know, sexualization or like, you know, graphic things happening. Just wild.
Yeah. Oh man.
Oh, I got to talk about this though.
Okay.
Because William Peter Blatty and Friedkin have talked about the movie, the second film at this point. William Friedkin recalled seeing the film. He says, "I was at Technicolor and a guy said, 'We just finished a print of Exorcist 2. Do you want to have a look?' And I looked at half an hour of it and I thought it was as dumb as seeing a traffic accident in the street. It was horrible. It was just a stupid mess made by a dumb guy, John Borman by name, somebody who should be nameless, but in this case should be named. A horrible picture." Friedkin later stated that this sequel diminished the value of the original and called it one of the worst films I've ever seen. He later added that film was made by a demented mind.
I agree. So that was one of the things I was going to say. The one of the things I think that makes people hate this movie so much is that love for the original. Like it's like how many other times have we seen like an absolute beloved classic movie of you know, in cinema history get like a big budget, you know, ostensibly serious sequel made that is an absolute travesty, that is trying to undercut the original, that is like deliberately damaging the legacy of the original. You know, this wasn't like a straight to video quiet release that was like not even really officially a sequel. This was an official sequel.
I want to say this movie made the most of any Exorcist film, or maybe it was like I think that's what it was.
It doesn't surprise me because maybe a little bit, but like what we've talked about so many times, like things follow on the success of the original so often.
Exactly.
I mean, that's why Jaws 2 was so good, right? Or did so well. Not was so good. We also had problems with that one, but not. I mean, it looks like fucking great compared to this movie.
Yeah, and that's why studios get the wrong idea, right? They're like, it doesn't matter. If we put the name on it and put something out, it's going to make money. And it's not always the case, but it's unfortunate that it is a thing because it leads to stuff like this coming out.
Happens in books all the time, like, you know.
Yeah.
Usually whatever the like most critically acclaimed, beloved book entry will be followed up by the one that sells the most opening week copies, because that's all the excitement carries over.
There were legitimate, at the first screening, people screaming at the screen, throwing food at the screen and stuff.
Wow.
Like immediate visceral reactions from people. I actually have a quote. This is unbelievable. William Friedkin, director of the first film, told a story recalled by a Warner Brothers executive at Chicago Critics Film Festival in April 2013. Studio heads came to the sneak preview of Exorcist 2 in a limo and told the drivers to go get fast food. They entered the auditorium, and within 10 minutes into the film, an audience member stood up, glanced into the crowd, and proclaimed, "The people who made this piece of shit are in this room." 10 or 12 other audience members gathered to find the executives. The heads rushed out of the theater and realized that there were no cars to make their escape. They were subsequently chased down the street by a group of angry audience members.
I feel like that can't be true, but I love it.
I mean, William Friedkin said it at a film festival in 2013.
He said he heard about it, right, or something. I mean, but yeah, man, I want it to be true, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy to think like right away. And I also was reading that a lot of audience, the switch, like the switch that was flipped was when the hypnosis machine was introduced.
Yeah.
That's when people were just like, no fucking way that this is happening right now. And honestly, that was a turning point for me in the movie as
well, and also just an incredibly difficult scene to watch. They make you watch a flashing light for like 10 straight minutes of just a bright flashing light on screen. I was like, this has got to be like a seizure warning for people, or it should be, you know. And even not that, it's just unpleasant to look at. I don't know. It's weird though, because like one part of me kind of likes a weird sci-fi premise, but it just doesn't belong in this story. So it's just a bad mashup, you know, idea. And again, even so, the idea of where that was going to go was it didn't nearly prepare me for just how bad things were going to get.
Yeah. When it came out, I found myself giving them the benefit of the doubt for a moment and being like, okay, 1977, we'll give it, you know, maybe people were super into hypnosis around this time. And I was thinking about it. And then I was just like, as the scenes played out, I was like, this sucks so bad. This is such a bad way to go about like trying to relive the trauma and stuff. Like so many other ways you could do that. And it'd be so much more interesting. It just was really, really rough.
The whole thing made no sense to me. Like at one point in the movie, I thought, okay, Reagan is in this institution and has been institutionalized and is like having these dreams about living in this swanky ass New York apartment. And that's the only explanation, because what is like, I guess her mother was like a famous star. So the idea is there's just a huge amount of wealth there, but why she kept coming back and submitting, to these experimental treatments, it just was never clear to me. And so I had this whole like theory about what was going on. Of course, none of that ends up being true. It apparently is all just like, nope, straightforward. You know, this is all as it seems, I guess. So I don't know, man. Okay. There's a part in the movie where there's a fire smoldering in the basement. And he's like, I gotta go find it. It's in this picture that Reagan drew. And then he finds a box that is like smoking. And then what does he do? He kicks over the box, spills out the fire, grabs a fucking crutch, and starts like scattering the flames with a crutch, just slamming it down into it, doing nothing. Creates an immense fire that ends up having to have the whole building evacuated. It was like one of the silliest sequences I've ever seen. Like, it just made no sense. And again, it's like, it's almost a stupid thing to argue about or to like quibble about, but it's just one of many things that upset me so much about this movie. It just, even little scenes like that, it can't behave in a way that is logical to the human experience.
Yeah. I something we haven't even mentioned yet, that she plays a part in this, is Louise Fletcher is in this film. And this directly follows One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Nurse Ratched is in this. And like, this is the next film that she did after One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
I was wondering where it fell in the timeline. Yeah, I thought she was like one of the few people who seemed to like care a little bit about the performance she was giving. Mm-hmm. Just the material was nothing, you know. But yeah, her journey. There's some point where they're like going back to the old house. And they're seem to be kind of racing. There's two groups. There's Reagan and Father Lamont, and then there's Tuscan and Sharon are going in the other group. And everything about this doesn't make sense. So I thought that they were trying to say that Father Lamont couldn't see Reagan anymore. Because there was a whole part where like she was talking to him and like jumping around in his face and he was not reacting. And I was like, is she a figment of his imagination because they were just hooked up to the dream machine?
I just thought he was fully possessed. I was like, he's fully been possessed.
But what is the explanation of why he was acting that way?
Eventually he just starts talking to her when they're on the train. And I was like, okay.
There is none. He was just being fucking weird. I don't know. Yeah. And then, that was the whole thing I had with the timelines was most egregious one of the most egregious was at this part where For some reason, they decided that it was important for Dr. Tuscan to get flagged down by an injured person on the side of the highway. She pulls over the car, gets out to help the man, and Rachel, who she's with, it's Rachel, right? Sharon, who she's with, says, well, I guess Reagan can wait. And I was like, oh, okay, so she's going to be delayed, and that's going to have some sort of significance. At the same time all this is happening, we're showing Reagan and Father Lamont on the train talking to each other, right? Mm-hmm. Immediately, the next cut back we get is them on the plane. And they're experiencing turbulence. And then the next cut back, we get their landing in Washington. All this time, the things that it's intercutting with is the same conversation between Lamont and Reagan on the train. So it seems to imply that during the course of this conversation, they're able to pull over and stop somebody and talk to somebody, miss their flight, somehow make another flight, and arrive in Washington. And over the course of, 5-10 minutes?
Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about. It makes no sense. And the whole point of having someone get delayed is completely lost when you edit it together like this. Why? Why even bother?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Explain it to me, James.
It doesn't make any sense to me either.
No, you have to explain to me. You have to defend the movie making here. What has happened?
I can't do it. I mean, I just think mistakes were made. I think everybody realizes that at this point. Everybody involved in it had said that it was, a mistake and one of the biggest disappointments of their career and all that. So if I had to guess, I already did speculate, but if I had to guess, I think it's just a lack of planning or severe studio meddling. It's otherwise I literally don't know how you can't have the footage to edit together. Well, it's almost like they didn't have a script in place that was actually working.
If you start at the top and then I'm sure the way it was, the people that was hired, the people that were hired, if you begin with someone who doesn't like the work they're doing, doesn't care about the original movie, doesn't care about the material, then he's going to surround himself with people who are just going to be there to get the shit done. Because, clearly the care wasn't there. And so, yeah, you're bringing in people who are just doing subpar work, and then the person who's looking at that work and deciding whether or not it's good enough to go into the film is going to say, yeah, fine, it's okay, because they don't care. Clearly everybody was just there to collect a check.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally been some people have actually said that they were there to collect a check.
Yeah, I mean, it shows in the performances. For many of the performances are just people collecting checks. Max von Sydow, he is not on screen very much.
I hope he got a large check.
But oh my god, the difference in the amount of shit that he gives in the performance here versus he clearly doesn't care about this movie. He knows what this movie is. I feel like he gave one take for everything he's in, at maybe two.
I just hope what happened was he made a ton of money based on the performance in the first movie. I just really hope that that's the case. A couple of last minute things. One of the co-producers of the film, Richard Lederer, said that originally the sequel was to be conceived as a low budget affair. They wanted to do it for using unused footage from the original, have a priest investigate, use unused angles, and then they wanted to make it for about $3 million. And the producer admits it's a cynical approach to movie making, I'll admit, but that was the start. And then the movie balloons in production. The production was refused permission to film at just about every location they asked for, including the house from the first film, leading to them having to recreate everything on the studio backlot and inflating the $9 million budget all the way up to $14 million.
Jesus.
So what was meant to be a small sequel.
And I wonder if they were being refused because they knew how terrible it was going to be, or if it was people going oh, I don't want that spooky Exorcist shit.
Yeah. I think it was a reaction to the first film.
Maybe a mix of both. I don't know. Either way, that's not going to lead to anything good. Wow, just what a disaster. It is interesting to know about, and as far and here's the other thing. If you're creative out there, I don't know, take heart, I guess, that there's shit like this being made. So the thing that you wrote probably isn't that bad.
What's funny about all of this is that I went into the movie because I saw your tweets before I started watching the movie, which was a fun journey for me, like I said in the tweet. I went in being like, how bad could it possibly be? I'm like, we'll see about that. Like, I'll get in, and like that's why I said, like, I found myself sort of like buying in a little bit and was like, okay, it's fun to be back in this world a little bit. Let's see what we can create here. And then that hypnosis machine drops down on the table, and they start using it, and that was the turning point for me, where I was just like, that leads me to my point. I sort of enjoyed watching this, and I hate, not that I hate, I don't love the idea of people being like, I watch bad movies because it's fun, because I think that there is something fun to it, but I also think that there's like, it's also become like a thing unto itself, like the whole Sharknado thing, making 10 of them, and like they just like, that's not very fun to me. But a movie that did try, like these people tried, and it's at a time where like they're trying to make money. Like,
so the distinction you're making is between people who are deliberately making bad films for a bad film audience versus people who are trying ostensibly to make a successful film. Maybe they weren't trying to make a great film, but they were trying to make a successful, like, decent film and just fail so spectacularly. Yeah. It is almost a different category of movie, right?
there's a distinction there to be made, but I feel like if you say I like watching bad movies, most people immediately jump to like Me Too, Sharknado kind of stuff. So
maybe, I don't know. I think there is a group of people who like watching these sort of like just awful, outings from days gone past.
Yeah, I'm never gonna watch it again, but it's nice to have seen it and experienced it.
I can't imagine devoting any more time to this than we are. We're gonna, as soon as we stop recording here, it's over.
It's just deleted from my brain.
I mean, yeah, I don't regret having seen it, but it's the kind of movie that I know I only watch this because I have a podcast, and we're gonna watch. We're kind of trying to be completionists. That's another thought I had. It's kind of like trying to platinum the Pazuzu trophy. It's like, okay, so if you want to be a completionist, then this is an important step. But, like, I don't care about that. I'm not someone who get platinums a lot of games. So I'm like, oh, no, that I'll skip over that shit. I don't care. I don't care about completing it. But, I guess I'm one step closer now after doing this.
Yeah. Well, we're going to cover The Exorcist 3, I assume, at some point.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, it is based off of a Blatty novel, so it's got that going for it. We could actually do a real coverage of it. But God, I can't believe they decided to call it Exorcist 3, because that immediately acknowledges the existence of this film, which seems like a bad decision. Just call it Exorcist 2 or something, or just a different Exorcist.
Just call it The Exorcist something : something.
Yeah.
Which people eventually realized they could do.
Maybe this was before that was a thing.
Yeah. I will say they waited, because of this movie and the backlash, I think they waited 15 years or something to make the third one.
Okay. I don't know, man. It still feels like a property that just needs to be, a single entity. It already is too, because it's a book and a movie, but it was such a distillation of a particular fear in a particular moment. And to keep trying to capitalize on it with subsequent films that are just poor imitations, it just seems like a bad idea.
I will give them there was a resurgence in Exorcist stuff, like the exorcism of Emily Rose is I know it's not directly connected, but there was some of in the early 2000s and into the 2000s there was it's
like a genre of horror movie, exorcist movies
right
now.
At this point
there is quite a few of them. That's clearly, and that's all about the original. This is the kind of movie that if you're a big fan of the original, people are going to probably warn you. Unless they're, sadists like Mike Arnson, they're going to warn you not to watch this because it's going to, it tarnishes the original film.
I don't let movies do that, but I know what you mean. It just in terms of the reputation by saying do you love the Exorcist movies?
It doesn't really. I agree. But it tries to.
It tries to.
It really wants to.
They slammed a car into the iconic moment where Max von Sydow was standing outside the window with the light, coming in, shining out at him. That iconic scenery is smashed through with a car. So
I wasn't even sure that was happening at the same time as the shit that was happening inside the house until halfway through that scene, because it seemed to have no relation to one another. There's a burning car that is smashed into the front of the house, yet the people inside have no idea that it's happening. And then the house starts ripping apart, but we don't see what that looks like from the outside for a long time. And finally, at some point, I was like, oh, they are at the same location, because I wasn't even sure for half of it. It was wild. And then there's two Reagans. Fucking Lamont rips the heart out of one of them as the whole house collapses into itself like poltergeist or something. And then they're left standing in this like ray of like beautiful morning sunshine. And then Reagan and Lamont walk off together like they're fucking romantic love interests with each other. Like it didn't make any sense. What was that?
Yeah, I don't know.
And then the second they walk away, 100 people show up to ask what happened. Like the crowd is flooded with people.
The transition was wild. I actually noticed that there was like this that we just did like a pan to show behind the doctor. And just like ambulances, everybody's like right behind her.
All the neighbors come out, all the ambulance, all the police. After they just had like a weird, slow, like scene because Lamont walks over and talks to her, and the burnt woman like just slumps over and I guess is dead.
It's so rough.
It looks so bad.
Oh man.
Anyway, if you didn't ever see this movie, I guess count yourself lucky. If you have seen it, then we share your misery, and that's probably why you're listening to this.
something I don't want to get into because we're wrapping up here is just that Martin Scorsese was one of the people who liked this movie when it came out. So look into that if you want.
That shows me that like everybody's human. There's something about this movie that he liked. Like he probably liked the idea of a hypnosis machine. I mean, look at Shutter Island he made later. He probably liked the idea of like, oh, this could have been like a fun idea, and maybe he just like got obsessed with like that was a fun idea, and then like that made him like the movie more or enough.
I do know that like he's Catholic, and I think that had something to do with it. I've read some stuff a little bit about it. So like he's Catholic, and he had some Catholic guilt, and that's what he liked about the first one. And then I think he liked how this was somewhat playing with Catholicism in a different way. But
and who knows? Like maybe he knows the guy who made it. There's things that can happen when you get filmmakers involved, right?
Yeah, exactly. So everyone's fallible. I think Martin Scorsese's wrong here, and that's blasphemy in filmmaking. So, but at the end of the day, like I do like the idea of finding something in a movie to at least engage with, whether it's good or bad, if you like it or not. I can usually find things to like, and there's plenty of things that this could have been. I think the idea of a worst movie of all time is interesting because this movie could have literally been, poorly executed. It could have been like the crew didn't know what they were doing, and the shaky, like they don't know how to, they're bumping the camera in the middle of shots and stuff. Like it was professionally made, so it's not the worst movie of all time.
I don't know. This movie was incredibly poorly made to me.
It was very bad, but are you I've seen student films.
Think about the way it looked when that guy fell down the fucking chasm. Do you remember how that was shot?
Yeah, absolutely.
He's flailing around, and then he's like, it's like a fucking weird like doll or something. I don't even know what it is. It looks so bad.
I'd say the worst large budget like studio film of all time, potentially.
I don't know. I haven't seen that Planet 9 or whatever movie people talk about, Ed Wood movie. That apparently is one of the other top ones, but this feels like a contender for sure.
Yeah, it's bad for sure.
Anyway, I hold you accountable for it.
It's still better than the first movie, like I said at the beginning.
Yeah.
That was an experience, and I'm glad I have it, I guess, now. And if somebody asks me about The Exorcist 2, I can tell them Martin Scorsese likes it, but I don't.
Yeah. Well, we hope you enjoy our pain. Maybe there's something enjoyable there. And until next time.
Thanks for listening.